I'm building a Bumpsteer gauge out of this Longacre plate and a dial gauge and some junk. For starters, need a base that goes in sort of a horseshoe shape so we can get the jack in through the center on the front. It'll need pivots here and here, where if this is the base sitting here, we'll need our pivots and then the upright section that will then hold the indicator and a roller to ride against the plate bolted to the wheel assembly. So we'll find some scrap pieces to make the base and the uprights out of and go from there. See what we got in our scrap pile over here. I know from measuring I'm going to need roughly 15 inches center to center on the pivots. So I'll need something for a base. Heavy is preferable. Oh yeah, I got some leftover roll cage tubing. There, we can cut that down to length, no problem. Then we'll need some legs. There, how about this stuff? Those have been playing long enough. Probably use one of them for the top of the top plate too. See what's long enough here. Yeah, hopefully we got enough there. We can always cut some and make a little stand to hold it up to the right height if we want. We'll need some uprights. There, how about these cheap ass strut tower mounts? Got an end on them. We can put a bolt through that, make our pivot, and just cut them the length we need, and hopefully they're solid. Just drill and tap the top. Probably use some more of that just to span the top, and then we can drill and tap through the center of them and be able to mount our dial indicator and the roller that'll ride on the plate. So let's get started. Sometimes your drill's dull and you got to sharpen in the middle of a job. And just making sure that everything's going to line up good when we start to weld it. Clean some paint off of those parts. And here we're getting the legs lined up and tacked on to that base plate tube. Just putting a couple of good tacks on both sides before putting a full weld to it. Now that I got both sides on, I'm adding some triangle gusset pieces that were just laying around from my shear when I cutting different things to size. Happen to have two pieces that worked out just great for this. It'll help keep the legs square to the rear tube. And here I'm adding some gussets, if you will, or just a stiffener to try to keep the legs straight down the sides on both sides. Came out with a little bit of tweak in it, so just bending it a little bit till it sits on the floor nice and square. Alright, tube ended up being hollow, so new plan is going to be drill a hole through it crossways. This piece of hydraulic tube I can cut off and then actually tap it for 1/2 inch 13, and then we'll just bolt it in across both sides. So hopefully drill it pretty straight. I'll have to drill again into these for mounting the indicator and the roller, but we'll be doing that in a little bit. Getting one of the uprights, putting the vise here so that it holds it nice and square. Then I can center punch on it. do my best to drill it pretty straight all the way through. Not too worried about how it is in relation to that pivot point on the other end, because that's adjustable and then I can just twist it to wherever it actually needs to be. Start out with pilot hole. Again, dull drill bits. Sharpen them some more. Cover the hole. Check that it'll fit. Bolt through it and then start on the other side. All kind of the same process. We can really skip over some of this stuff. And here I'm grinding the cross tube down. Just get squared up on one side because it had kind of an angle cut to it. Then we can start tapping. The hydraulic tube was actually really stiff and difficult to tap. Switch to the cutoff wheel. And you cut the other side off to length. And same thing here. Just take time, try to get it tapped straight, deburr the corners there a little bit with the file. Suppose you're wondering what I'm going to do for a roller, and enter small block Chevy roller lifter, or rather an LS one, and a metric bolt that just happens to almost fit down in there completely tight. So I figure we hit this with a hammer, maybe we'll have a nice little press fit and not have to worry about it. Now, because of the way this is mounting, I want to make sure I'm in line with the shaft for the roller. So it'll mount like this, but in the, yeah, this way. Or the other direction, actually, it'll be on the bottom. I'm just going to drill the tap hole all the way through, and then for the indicator on this side, we'll have to go perpendicular through it. So we'll worry about that one in a minute. And while we're drilling and tapping for putting that roller installed, I should mention that it really didn't work out quite just with the press fit. I ended up having to put a couple of tack welds on that bolt to that lifter. Actually screwed up here with where I've drilled this original hole for mounting the dial indicator. What happened was I forgot to factor in the offset of the dial indicator versus its mount hole, which ended up being roughly 3/4 of an inch. Wasn't a big deal, as I was able to just drill and tap another hole lower down after I discovered my screw up here. Had a piece of an old seat mount that just happened to be hollow and slightly over a 1/4 inch on the ID, so it'll clear my bolt, and I just cut it off a chunk as a spacer. Just putting it together for final assembly. Got a few threads that go into the side of that upright, and a nut just to turn it back to the location I want it, and then jam nut it. This gives me adjustability for a little bit of up and down on where it's actually indicating. Alright, and we're all finished up. We got good range of motion on the indicator. The roller's sitting on the plate. And even just letting it down through some droop, we can see that it seems to be working here. And clearly there are some bump steer problems with this current setup. Granted, it doesn't usually get into this much droop, and if it does, it's the wheel that's hanging on the inside, which may not be that big a deal, but the problem comes in is when you start going into compression and it starts moving around, much like that. But yeah, gauge seems to work. I should be able to use it as a good tool for figuring out how to eliminate bump steer, or if I convert to a rack and pinion. With this, I'll still have to go through the same thing with the tie rods. So in the next video, we'll go through how to actually use this.